Hannah's fingers hovered over her phone's screen as she stared at the blinking cursor in the chat window. The message was innocent enough. A quick update to her husband, Daniel, about her weekend plans. Or at least, it looked innocent. Hannah, heading to the women's wellness retreat now. Love you. Don't forget to pack Noah's soccer bag for tomorrow. Her thumb lingered over the send button. The truth was that this message wasn't just a casual check-in. It was part of a carefully constructed alibi. The retreat she'd mentioned didn't exist. Instead, she was about to embark on a weekend getaway with Marcus, her coworker, the man who had made her question everything about the life she had built with Daniel. The lies had started small, almost harmless. A lingering coffee break with Marcus after a long meeting, a message that strayed just beyond professional boundaries. But those small lies had grown, twisting themselves into a tangled web that Hannah could no longer control. And now, she found herself sitting in her car at a gas station on the edge of town, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Is this worth it? She wondered, for what felt like the 1,000th time. But the answer had always been the same. With Marcus, Hannah felt alive. She loved Daniel, of course. How could she not? He was the father of her children, her partner for over a decade. But somewhere along the way, the fire in their marriage had dimmed, replaced by the monotony of shared responsibilities and late nights folding laundry in silence. Marcus was different. He was magnetic, confident in a way that Daniel wasn't, and he made her feel like the 20-year-old girl she used to be, carefree, reckless, and full of passion. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. Marcus, the cabin's ready. Can't wait to see you. Hannah's stomach flipped. It was time. She hit send on her message to Daniel, started the car, and pulled out of the gas station. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. It was the kind of place people dreamed about escaping to, cozy, with a roaring fireplace and a view of the lake that seemed to stretch on forever. Marcus had spared no expense, and Hannah couldn't deny the rush of excitement she felt as she stepped inside. Marcus greeted her with a glass of wine and a grin that made her knees weak. "To a perfect weekend," he said, clinking his glass against hers. Hannah laughed, feeling the tension of her lies melt away, at least for the moment. Here, she could pretend that this was her life, a life without the constant pull of responsibilities and the weight of a marriage that felt more like a partnership than a romance. They spent the evening wrapped in each other's arms, their conversation easy and free of the constraints of their real lives. Marcus talked about his plans to start his own business, his dreams of traveling the world, and his disdain for the corporate grind that had brought them together in the first place. "What about you?" Marcus asked, his hand tracing lazy circles on her back as they lay on the couch. "If you could do anything, be anywhere, what would it be?" Hannah hesitated. The truth was, she didn't know anymore. For so long, her life had been defined by her roles: wife, mother, employee. She had forgotten what it felt like to dream beyond the boundaries of her daily existence. I just want to feel like this all the time," she admitted softly. Marcus smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We'll make it happen." Hannah wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this weekend could be more than just an escape, that it could be the beginning of something new. But deep down, she knew better. Meanwhile, Daniel was at home, juggling the chaos of a Saturday morning with two energetic kids. Noah, their 7-year-old, was bouncing off the walls, trying to find his soccer cleats, while Lily, their toddler, was determined to paint the walls with her breakfast. Daniel didn't mind. He loved being a dad, even if it meant sacrificing his own plans and sanity most days. He missed Hannah, though. She had seemed distant lately, and he had hoped this retreat would help her relax and recharge. But something about her recent behavior nagged at him. She had been glued to her phone more than usual, quick to dismiss his questions about her day. And there was the way she had packed for this trip, rushed, almost like she was afraid he would notice something. Daniel shook off the thought. Hannah was a great mom, a great wife. He had no reason to doubt her. But later that afternoon, as he scrolled through his phone while the kids napped, something caught his attention. A breaking news alert lit up the screen. Mysterious cabin fire leaves 2 injured in local woods. Investigators suspect faulty heating system. Daniel wouldn't have given it a second thought, except for the picture accompanying the article. It was grainy, likely taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking the silhouette of the woman in the photo, Hannah. She was standing near the cabin, a blanket draped around her shoulders, talking to emergency responders. Beside her stood a man Daniel didn't recognize. For a moment, Daniel's mind refused to process what he was seeing. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. Why was Hannah at a cabin? Who was that man? And why hadn't she told him anything about this? His hand shook as he clicked on the article, hoping for some explanation that would make this all make sense. But the more he read, the clearer it became that the women's retreat Hannah had mentioned was a lie. Daniel stared at the news article for what felt like an eternity, the room around him fading into the background. His heart pounded in his chest as his mind raced to make sense of what he was seeing. There was no mistaking it. Hannah was in the photo, standing by a charred cabin, wrapped in a blanket, and talking to a man who clearly wasn't anyone he recognized. The headline burned in his mind. Mysterious cabin fire leaves 2 injured in local woods. Investigators suspect faulty heating system. Daniel's first instinct was denial. This had to be some kind of mistake, right? Maybe the photo wasn't her. Maybe the news outlet had misidentified the person in the picture. But the longer he looked, the harder it was to deny. The shape of her face, the slope of her shoulders, even the casual way she held the blanket, it was unmistakably Hannah. But if Hannah was at that cabin, where was her yoga retreat? Where were the friends she told him she was meeting? And most damning of all, who was the man standing beside her? Lily's cries broke him from his daze. She had woken up from her nap, and her small, plaintive voice was calling for him from the next room. Daniel shoved his phone into his pocket and forced himself to focus on his daughter, lifting her out of her crib and cradling her in his arms. But even as he rocked Lily and soothed her back to sleep, his mind was consumed by the questions swirling around Hannah's apparent deception. By the time Noah woke up and demanded help with his soccer gear, Daniel had already decided what he needed to do. After the kids were settled with snacks and a cartoon marathon in the living room, Daniel returned to the kitchen and pulled out his laptop. He typed the cabin's location from the article into the search bar and combed through news reports, local forums, and social media posts. He found more photos, some blurry, taken by onlookers who had gathered outside the taped-off area, but others were clear enough to make his stomach drop. One picture, posted on a local Facebook group, showed the cabin engulfed in flames. The caption read, "We heard an explosion before the fire. 2 people got out, thank God, but the place is gone." Another showed Hannah and the same man from earlier, this time standing closer together, their heads bent toward each other, as if sharing a private conversation. The way his hand rested on her shoulder made Daniel's blood boil. Daniel's anger bubbled to the surface. He pulled out his phone and texted Hannah. "Daniel, hey, how's the retreat going? Everything okay?" He forced himself to wait, watching the screen like a hawk. After a few minutes, her reply came through. "Hannah, it's great. Super relaxing. We're about to start a meditation session. Love you." The bile rose in Daniel's throat. She was lying. Every part of him wanted to call her right then and there, to demand an explanation, to force her to confront the mountain of evidence he had just uncovered. But something stopped him. He wanted to know the whole truth before he confronted her. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Daniel sat in the living room, his phone resting heavily in his hand. He scrolled through Hannah's social media, searching for anything that could confirm his suspicions. She hadn't posted anything about the supposed retreat, not even the usual curated pictures she liked to share. Then he checked their shared calendar. Hannah had blocked off the weekend with the words, "Yoga Retreat, Girls Weekend." But when he clicked on the event, there were no details, no links to the retreat location or itinerary. It was vague, too vague for the usually meticulous Hannah. The next step was harder. Daniel opened their shared cloud storage account. He and Hannah had long since linked their phones to the account, using it to share family photos and important documents. How would you feel if your best friend was the one cheating? Write in the comments. Trip. His chest tightened as he clicked on it. Inside were photos, some taken at the cabin, others of the lake nearby. And there they were, Hannah and the man from the news photo. In one picture, they were sitting by the water, their heads leaning close together. In another, they were laughing, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The caption she'd added to the photos made Daniel's heart sink even further. "Finally a weekend just for us. Can't believe how perfect this place is." The anger Daniel had felt earlier now burned white-hot. He wanted to throw the phone across the room, to scream, to do anything to release the betrayal clawing at his chest. Instead, Daniel turned his focus toward the man in the pictures. He saved one of the clearer images to his phone and ran it through a reverse image search. It didn't take long to find his answer. The man was Marcus, one of Hannah's co-workers. Daniel recognized him vaguely from a company picnic they'd attended together last summer. Marcus had been charming, charismatic, the kind of guy who seemed to thrive on attention. At the time, Daniel hadn't thought much of him. But now, knowing what he knew, he realized he had overlooked something obvious. This wasn't just a weekend fling. Hannah and Marcus had been planning this for months. Daniel spent the rest of the evening piecing together the timeline. The late nights at the office, the sudden yoga retreat, the photos, it all added up. By the time the sun rose, Daniel had made his decision. He wasn't going to let Hannah come home and sweep this under the rug. He was going to confront her with the evidence and make her explain herself, no matter how ugly the truth might be. But first, he had one more thing to do. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. The pictures, the news article, and the lies Hannah had fed him were all laid bare. The betrayal felt suffocating, like a knot tightening in his chest with every passing moment. He wanted answers, needed them. But he wasn't going to confront Hannah without ensuring he had everything he needed. The kids were still asleep upstairs, their small, even breaths the only sound breaking the silence of the early morning. It was almost surreal how normal everything felt in contrast to the storm brewing inside him. Daniel knew Hannah would be back later that evening. Her yoga retreat was supposed to wrap up at noon, giving her time to relax before coming home. But now he knew better. She wasn't at a retreat. She was probably still holed up with Marcus, trying to salvage their weekend after the fire had thrown a wrench into their plans. Determined to be prepared, Daniel began gathering evidence. He printed the news article that had exposed Hannah's secret, complete with the photos of her and Marcus standing near the burned cabin. He also saved screenshots of the Facebook posts, the photos from their shared cloud, and her texts about the fake retreat. The final touch was pulling up Marcus's professional profile online. There he was, smiling confidently in a business suit, with a bio that described him as a results-driven marketing professional. The sight of his smug face made Daniel's blood boil. Results-driven, Daniel muttered bitterly. Yeah, I bet you are. By the time Daniel finished, the table was covered in evidence. He sat back, staring at the pile, his mind racing. He could already imagine the confrontation. Hannah walking through the door, her cheerful facade crumbling the moment she realized he knew everything. But the thought didn't bring him the satisfaction he expected. Instead, it left him feeling hollow. How had it come to this? Just a few days ago, he had kissed her goodbye, trusting her completely. He had believed her when she said she needed time to recharge, to reconnect with herself. Now, he realized she had been reconnecting with someone else entirely. The kids woke up around 8 a.m., pulling Daniel from his thoughts. He set his emotions aside as best he could, focusing on making breakfast and keeping things as normal as possible for their sake. Noah chattered excitedly about his soccer game that afternoon, while Lily babbled happily in her high chair. But even as he smiled and nodded, Daniel's mind was elsewhere. He kept glancing at the clock, counting down the hours until Hannah's return. By early afternoon, Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from Hannah. Hannah, hey! Just finished up here. Heading home soon. Can't wait to see you and the kids. Red Heart Daniel stared at the message, the casual tone and heart emoji making his stomach churn. How could she act so normal? How could she lie so easily, knowing what she had done? He typed out a reply, his fingers trembling slightly. Daniel, we'll be here. Hannah pulled into the driveway around 4 p.m., her car loaded with what appeared to be yoga mats and an overnight bag. She stepped out, smiling brightly as she waved at Daniel, who was standing in the doorway. Hey! She called out. I missed you guys so much. Daniel didn't respond. He simply stepped aside, letting her walk past him into the house. She seemed oblivious to his silence, setting her bag down and bending to hug Noah and Lily, who had rushed to greet her. As Hannah fussed over the kids, Daniel's eyes burned into her back. How could she act so normal? So loving? When the kids ran off to the playroom, Daniel finally spoke. We need to talk. Hannah froze for a moment, then turned to face him. Sure, she said, her smile faltering slightly. What's up? Daniel gestured toward the kitchen table. Let's sit down. The moment Hannah stepped into the kitchen, her expression changed. The neatly arranged pile of evidence on the table, photos, screenshots, and the printed article, stole the color from her face. What is this? She stammered, her voice trembling. Daniel crossed his arms, his jaw clenched. Why don't you tell me, Hannah? Why don't you explain why you're in a news article about a cabin fire with Marcus? And don't bother lying. I've got everything right here. Hannah's eyes darted to the article, then to the photos of her and Marcus. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Start talking, Daniel said, his voice low and cold. I want to know how long this has been going on. I want to know why you thought you could lie to me, to our family, and get away with it. Hannah began, but her voice broke. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean for this to happen. Daniel's laugh was sharp and bitter. Didn't mean for it to happen? Spare me, Hannah. You've been planning this for months. The fake retreat, the lies, the late nights. Do you think I'm stupid? Hannah looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Marcus and I, it was just supposed to be fun. An escape. I never meant to hurt you. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. An escape? From what, Hannah? From your family? From the life we built together? Was it all so unbearable that you had to run off with him? No, she whispered. It wasn't like that. I love you, Daniel. I do. Don't, Daniel snapped. Don't you dare say you love me. People who love each other don't do this. They don't lie, cheat, and sneak around. Hannah sobbed openly now, her shoulders shaking as she tried to speak. I know I'm messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, please don't give up on us. Daniel stared at her, his heart a mix of rage and heartbreak. He had loved this woman, trusted her, and she had betrayed him in the most public, humiliating way possible. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, he said finally, his voice trembling, and I don't know if I want to. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, signaling the end of something they might never be able to rebuild. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Hannah sat motionless in her chair, her tear-streaked face a pale shadow of the confident woman who had left for her supposed retreat just days earlier. Across from her, Daniel stood rigid, his arms crossed, a storm brewing behind his eyes. I don't even know who you are anymore, Daniel said finally, his voice breaking the stillness. Daniel, please. Hannah whispered, but her words trailed off, drowned by the suffocating weight of his anger and disappointment. Please, what? Daniel snapped, slamming his hand on the table. The papers, screenshots, and photos shook under the impact. Please forget that you lied to my face? That you cheated on me with him? That you dragged our family through the mud while pretending everything was fine? Hannah flinched, the force of his words cutting through her like a blade. She opened her mouth to respond, but no excuse seemed adequate. How could she justify what she had done? It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said weakly, her voice trembling. Oh, really? Daniel said bitterly, his laugh devoid of humor. Then how was it supposed to be, Hannah? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been living a double life. Sneaking around, lying to me, lying to our kids. What kind of person does that? For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavy with unspoken words, regrets, and the unbearable realization that the life they had built together might be irreparably broken. Hannah wiped her face with trembling hands, her mind racing to find the right words, something, anything, that might make him understand. It wasn't about you, Daniel, she said softly. Not about me. Daniel's voice rose, incredulous. Then what was it about, Hannah? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you threw everything away for him. For a man who couldn't even bother to be discreet about your little fling. It wasn't like that, Hannah said, her voice cracking. Marcus, he made me feel alive again. I felt so lost, so stuck in this routine, and with him Daniel held up his hand, cutting her off. Don't try to spin this into some excuse about how I wasn't enough for you. You think you're the only one who feels tired? Stuck? Do you know how many nights I stayed up, trying to figure out how to make you happy? How to make us work? Hannah's sobs grew louder, but Daniel didn't stop. The dam of emotions he had held back for years was bursting, and there was no turning back. I sacrificed for this family, Hannah, he continued, his voice shaking. I worked long hours, gave up time with my friends, with my hobbies, all because I thought we were in this together. And all the while, you were sneaking off with Marcus, living some fantasy while I was here taking care of our kids. Hannah looked up at him, her red-rimmed eyes desperate. I didn't mean to hurt you, Daniel. I swear I didn't. I love you. I love our family. I made a mistake. A mistake? Daniel's laugh was sharp and bitter. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk from the store. This was a choice, Hannah. You chose to lie. You chose to cheat. Over and over again. He turned away from her, pacing the room as his emotions threatened to overwhelm him. His mind flashed back to the early days of their relationship, when Hannah had been his rock, his partner in everything. He had loved her so deeply, trusted her completely. And now that trust was gone, shattered into pieces, he couldn't imagine ever putting back together. The sound of tiny footsteps broke the tension. Noah peeked around the corner, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mommy? Daddy? Why are you yelling?" Hannah wiped her face quickly, forcing a weak smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Everything's fine. Go play with your sister, okay?" Noah frowned, but he nodded and disappeared back into the playroom. Daniel's heart ached as he watched his son retreat. The kids didn't deserve this, didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of their parents' crumbling marriage. "We can't do this here," Daniel said quietly, his voice calmer now, but no less firm. "Not in front of them." Hannah nodded, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I'm taking them to my parents' house for the night," Daniel continued. "You can stay here. We'll talk tomorrow." "Daniel, please," Hannah began, but he silenced her with a look. "I need space, Hannah. And right now, I can't even look at you." That evening, Daniel packed an overnight bag for the kids and drove to his parents' house. His mother greeted him with a warm hug, her eyes full of concern when she noticed his strained expression. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. Daniel hesitated, glancing at Noah and Lily, who were already running toward the living room. "It's complicated," he said finally, "but I'll explain later." His father, sensing the weight on his son's shoulders, patted him on the back. "Take your time," he said. "We're here for you." For the first time that day, Daniel felt a flicker of relief. He wasn't alone. Back at home, Hannah sat in the quiet house, her thoughts racing. She had never felt so alone, so utterly lost. The house felt cold, empty without the noise of the kids or Daniel's steady presence. She replayed their argument in her mind, every word cutting deeper than the last. She had known this moment would come eventually, that the lies would catch up to her, but she had never imagined it would happen like this. The guilt was overwhelming. She thought about all the little moments she had taken for granted, the way Daniel always kissed her goodbye before leaving for work, the way he stayed up late to help with the kids' projects, the quiet nights they spent watching TV together. She had destroyed all of it. And for what? As she stared at the evidence Daniel had left on the table, the reality of her choices sank in. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal of everything they had built together. The next morning, Daniel returned home, his expression unreadable as he stepped through the door. Hannah had barely slept, her mind tortured by what he might say, what decision he might have made about their future. They sat down at the kitchen table, the tension between them thick and oppressive. "I don't know if we can come back from this," Daniel said finally, his voice low but steady. Hannah's heart sank, but she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered. "I'll go to therapy. I'll do counseling. Anything to fix this." Daniel shook his head. "This isn't something you can just fix, Hannah. You broke something in me, something I don't know if I can ever get back." The morning was eerily quiet. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Across from him, Hannah stared at the remnants of their life spread across the table. Printed screenshots, photos of her with Marcus, and the damning news article that had exposed her affair. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Daniel's face was unreadable, his silence stretching into the kind of void that made every second feel like an eternity. Hannah's voice trembled as she finally broke the stillness. "Daniel, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know that's not enough, but I don't know what else to say." Daniel's jaw tightened, his gaze still fixed on the evidence between them. "You're right," he said, his voice cold and steady. "It's not enough. Nothing you say can change what you've done." The day before had been a blur for Daniel. Dropping off the kids at his parents' house, sitting alone in his car, replaying their argument over and over in his mind. Every word, every tear Hannah had shed, Every excuse she had offered, it all played on a loop, alongside the images of her smiling at Marcus by that cabin. It wasn't just the affair itself that gutted him. It was the sheer effort she had put into deceiving him. The fake retreat, the perfectly crafted alibi, the texts laced with heart emojis to cover her tracks. She hadn't just betrayed him, she'd made him a fool. But the hardest part was knowing how deeply this would hurt their children. Noah and Lily adored their mother. They saw her as a beacon of love and comfort, someone who could do no wrong. How would they reconcile this with the truth? How could Daniel protect them from the fallout of her betrayal? Back in the kitchen, Hannah reached across the table, her hand trembling as she tried to bridge the chasm between them. "Daniel, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't give up on us. I made a mistake, but I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me what you need." Daniel's eyes finally met hers, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something, pain, maybe, or hesitation. But it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by a cold resolve. "What I need," he said slowly, his voice heavy, "is to not feel like I've been lied to every day for months. What I need is to not picture you with him every time I close my eyes. What I need, Hannah, is something you can't give me anymore, trust." His words were a knife to her heart. She felt the tears spill over again, hot and unrelenting. "I know I hurt you," she said, "but I love you, Daniel. I love our family. Please don't throw it all away because of my mistake." Daniel's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Your mistake? That's what you're calling this. You didn't just trip and fall into an affair, Hannah. You made a choice. Over and over again. You chose him. You chose to lie. To betray me. To betray us." Hannah's sobs grew louder, but Daniel didn't stop. His voice rose, the anger he had been holding back finally spilling over. "Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just hurt me. You hurt our kids. You shattered the family we built together. And for what? For some fling with a coworker who doesn't even have the decency to keep you out of the news?" Hannah buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. She had never felt so broken, so utterly consumed by regret. But her tears did little to soften Daniel's resolve. "I need to think about the kids," Daniel said, his voice calmer now, but no less firm. "They deserve better than this. Better than the lies and the chaos. They need stability. And I need to figure out how to give that to them." Hannah looked up at him, desperation etched across her face. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel took a deep breath, his hands tightening into fists before relaxing again. "It means this is over, Hannah," he said. "I can't do this anymore. I can't look at you and not see the person who broke me. And I won't let our kids grow up in a house full of resentment and anger." Her breath hitched. "No, please, Daniel. Don't say that. We can fix this. We can." Daniel shook his head. "Not this time." The days that followed were excruciating. Daniel contacted a lawyer to begin the process of separation, and Hannah reluctantly moved into a small apartment nearby to be close to the kids. She fought for shared custody, desperate to hold on to some semblance of the life she had destroyed. Noah and Lily didn't understand at first. To them, everything had been fine one day and completely upended the next. They asked questions Daniel struggled to answer. Why isn't Mommy living with us anymore? Did she do something bad? Daniel did his best to shield them from the truth, but it wasn't easy. He didn't want to paint Hannah as the villain, but he also couldn't bring himself to lie for her anymore. Mommy and Daddy need some time apart, he told them gently. But we both love you very much. That will never change. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel found himself adjusting to his new reality. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, when he lay awake wondering how things had gone so wrong. But there were also moments of clarity, moments when he realized that this was the first step toward healing. Hannah, meanwhile, struggled to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. Her relationship with Marcus had ended abruptly after the news article went viral, and her reputation at work had taken a hit. She threw herself into therapy, trying to understand why she had made the choices she had, but the weight of her guilt was a constant shadow. One evening, months after the separation, Daniel sat on the porch, watching Noah and Lily play in the yard. The laughter of his children brought a rare smile to his face, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still light. His phone buzzed, and he saw a message from Hannah. "Hannah, I know I've said this before, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry. For everything. I hope someday you can forgive me." Daniel stared at the message for a long time before typing a response. "Daniel, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, but I hope you find peace. For the kid's sake, I hope we can move forward." He hit send, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't expected. Hannah's betrayal had broken him, but it hadn't destroyed him. He had his kids, his strength, and the knowledge that he deserved better. And as he watched the sun dip below the horizon, he realized that the end of one chapter was just the beginning of another.